Alright, philosophy class now. It's time for a little philosophy of logic. 2.5. We've been doing modal logic, possible world semantics. That means we've been working with possible worlds. But what are these things that we call possible worlds? Well, first we can ask, what are we talking about when we're doing possible world semantics? And one possibility is that we're not talking about anything. All right, we're not saying anything really. We've constructed some kind of really complex and pretty system, but it relates to nothing in the real world. When I say an interpretation, right, and by interpretation, remember, for modal semantics, we have set of world, the relations on those worlds, and the truth values at each world. This is just a bunch of objects with properties and relations. That's all I'm talking about. I have this set of stuff, and this stuff, that's all that it refers to. The possible worlds are nothing, and that the semantics of the possible world semantics are just an instrument for an appropriate notion of validity. In other words, it just works, right? The truth values all just happen to shake out, and sweet. Somehow I created this thing totally out of thin air, and it just happens to work. That's not a really good possibility. You still are left with this question. Okay, I mean, even if possible worlds are nothing in and of themselves, why do they work, right? Something about reality seems to be the case that modal logic using possible world semantics works, right? So what is it that makes them work? Well, the second possibility would be that they are a representation of something, right? And you can remain, so far we'll remain vague on the something, we're just trying to contradistinct it with possibility one here. So it's representing something. Modal logic structure represents the structure of truth, right? So in other words, the way that the modal logic in possible world semantics shakes out represents the way that the world shakes out somehow. So then you're left with the question, okay, but then what is that thing? What is a possible world? And with possible worlds, you have a few possibilities of what a possible world can be. And the first one is modal realism. Modal realism. And that is that possible worlds are existing concrete things. So we have our actual world, right? This world that we're living in. Well, this theory would say that possible worlds are those just like this world right here. So we have an actual world, but when I say there's a possible world that's exactly like our world, but instead of cats being whatever color they are, all cats are gray, then I'm talking about there's an actual world somewhere else that's exactly like this one has all cats gray in it. And of course, the first objection probably in your mind is, what? That's weird. What are you even talking about? There's a real world that's out there that's exactly like this one, right? That's weird. By the way, mind-boggling. I got this from that book that I showed you at the beginning, the Graham Priest book. He says mind-boggling. That's why he came up with the terminology, not me. Mind-boggling. Yeah, that's freaky, right? Of course, and he's right about this, I think. There are a lot of things that are freaky in the world. Right? A lot of weird stuff. You want proof? Go look at an experimental physics class, right? So there's a lot of stuff that we learned about in the real world that are mind-boggling. So maybe this isn't such a big thing to swallow. So there's objection one. Objection two would be something like this. If I have, let's say this is world 0, this is our world, and I want to say world 1 is the same as our world except for all cats are gray, why not just say that these two things are one big world, right? This is actually one world, and these are different parts of the same world, right? Why not just say that? It would make it a little bit easier. Of course, and then you'd have the problem with how is it that world 1 makes this one, things in this one, possible, right? You kind of lose the possible and actual distinction. So if you are a modal realist, you don't like this option. You want to avoid this because if it makes one world the same world, two worlds of the same world, now you don't have another world just like this that you can say, okay, this is possibly that one because here's this other one that's like this one. So they want to avoid that. So they want to be able to make these two different worlds. And here's how they do it usually. A philosopher named David Lewis, by the way, came up with this, and he said, well, these two things are divided. They're not the same world. Why? Because this is spatio-temporally discrete from this one. In other words, they're not connected by space or time, and they're also not causally connected. So nothing in here can cause anything in here, and yet they're all concrete things. So this is disconnected from that. So they're different worlds. As to motivate this, to motivate an intuition here, what these guys will do is they say something like this: imagine that you are traveling into a black hole and down a wormhole into a region of the cosmos with its own space-time, right? And then that wormhole closes up. You would be disconnected from the cosmos, right? A response to that might be that, or maybe this is an objection to that actually. An objection to that might be that just because they're isolated space-times doesn't mean that they're disconnected space-times, right? So I could say maybe these two things are isolated from each other on that view, right? Let's say, so what they're saying is something like, let's say there's a wormhole, right? And you can get through there, and then the wormhole closes up, and these things can be totally, they can have their own space-time. Look, they'd be disconnected. No, because they're isolated doesn't mean they're disconnected. And here's what I mean. You were in this area at one time, and on this theory, or not this theory, but on this example, you're in this theory at one time. Then you go to this area, and at time 2, that's a before and an after, right? Whenever you have a before and an after, you have time. You have temporal connectedness, right? So they're not temporally disconnected, right? This at some moment on world 0 is temporally connected to some moment on world 1, and from there on out you have before and after the two worlds. Also, you have some kind of causation between the two worlds, right? Something causes you from over here to go over here, even if they're disconnected eventually, or you can't cause back here. There is some kind of causal connection. Something that happened here caused, a chain of events in world 1. So yeah, I don't think this support really works for this one. If they're actually spatio-temporally disconnected and causally disconnected, then that doesn't show it. And a third objection is what happens, and this is by a philosopher named Saul Kripke. What happens in a different world has nothing to do with the possibilities of this universe. Right? So what does this mean? Well, if we have world 0 us and world 1 somebody else, and in, let's say, let me redraw this. So we have world 0 is us, and world 1 is these other guys. And in world 0, I'm a normal guy, but in world, if you call that picture normal, but in world 1, let's say I lost my legs, right? That's the difference between the two. Well, this whole apparatus, the reason that we have it is to say that it's possible that I don't have any legs. Why? Because there's some possible world where I don't have any legs, right? The thing is, this guy over here, if he's a real guy, even if he's exactly like me, even if he looks just like me, that's not me, right? He's actually some other guy. David Lewis, in giving his whole theory, he says that this collection, these guys are your counterparts, right? You have a counterpart relation. But he still never shows you why your counterpart is you. It's possible that this guy has no legs, my counterpart has no legs, but it's not possible that I have no legs because the counterpart doesn't have any legs. You never really explain that relation. So objection 3 there is that it doesn't explain it doesn't explain why it's possible in this world. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a really nice, David Lewis has really brilliant semantics, but it just doesn't explain. I don't think anyway. Possibility 2, modal actualism. This says that possible worlds are existing but abstract things, right? So David Lewis before this, modal realism, was saying that they're possible and real things, just concrete things, excuse me, just like this world right here. This would say that they do exist, yes, but they're abstract, kind of like Plato, his stuff that he talks about, the forms, right? So here's a possibility one. If you're a modal actualist, you could say that possible worlds are sets of maximally consistent propositions. And by propositions, if you've done nature or philosophy of language, propositions don't mean like what they normally mean in logic, right? If A, then B. That's not what we're talking about, like the A's and the B's. What they're talking about here is that, if I have a sentence, the cat is white, let's say that is C, and sentence C, and a sentence over here, sentence D is, let's call it G, sentence G, el gato es blanco, right? Why? How do they mean the same thing? Well, there's some proposition that exists apart from these things that's not located in any space or any time, that these things mean, right? These things mean this proposition. We'll call this proposition P, right? It's an abstract object. It exists, but it doesn't exist like this concrete sentence that I'm speaking right now, right? It exists as some kind of other entity, and sentences get their meanings from this proposition. So you have this proposition P, and let's say you have another one Q, and you put a whole bunch of them all together, then all fit together. So I don't have not P over here, right? I have P and I have Q and things that all fit, and then you get as many as you can that all fit together, and that's a possible world. One objection to this would be that it's an explanatory circle, right? What makes things possible? Well, I have something up here that makes them possible, right? Some possible world, some propositions. I'm sorry, that makes things. That's what a possible world is. Well, if you say a possible world, let's say W1 is equal to this stuff, and you don't explain this stuff, all you've done is add some extra stuff out there. So what is a possible world? It's a this. Well, what is that? It's a possible world, right? Okay, well then you're just going around in a circle. Now, there is a philosopher named Alvin Plantinga who posits these things as just what he'll just call them primitives, right? Okay, great, but I have a direct intuition of these things, right? I just know what a proposition is just directly somehow. And if you're like Alvin Plantinga, then you'll have no problem with his explanatory circle. You're going to say, no, I start here, and that explains, putting them together, it does explain world one. I don't have to explain these things. I don't have to say these things are that. I can say, I know what propositions are, and this is what I mean by a world. So yeah, there's a possibility for you if you are a modal actualist. Another possibility is possibility 2 here is called combinatorialism. That's, I know, a crazy name, but that would just say that possible worlds are sets of things in this world, but you just rearrange these sets, right? So in this world you have a cat and you have white things. You rearrange the things and you get a white cat, something like that. That's a lot prettier than this system because you don't have all this extra propositions up here, right? You don't have to posit all these other weird stuff. All you use is the real world, right? We have the real world already. You use all the stuff in the real world. You don't have any extra stuff, so your system looks nice and clean. An objection to that is that there are some objects possible that have at least some property or part that is not obtainable from anything in this world. So if you believe that there is something, some kind of property that you can't find in this world, maybe the property of unicornness, I don't know, something like that, then combinatorialism since it only uses things in the real world, it can't get to that, right? Maybe you can think of, just a unicorn is a horse with a horn, right? So I'm using stuff in this real world. Yeah, but I mean, if you believe something like maybe there's a color that no one's ever seen before that's not in the real world, that something like that. If there's something like that, and it doesn't really seem like there's any reason not to think that there couldn't be, then combinatorialism can't account for that. one last possibility. This is a very new possibility. Is theist modal metaphysics. A philosopher named Brian Leftow just recently, in 2013, came out with a book called God and Necessity, I think. Yeah, God and Necessity. And he would say, when you say a possible world, a maximal set of possibilities, what do you mean? You mean a power of God, something God could do. So God could have brought about world one, and what that does is if you already have God, then it's I mean, as if you have God as part of your philosophical system, right? You have sort of the best of both worlds. You have, like in combinatorialism, you're just using the stuff that you already believe in, the stuff in the real world already, and yet somehow you can also account for things that don't exist right now, right? You can say in world one there's the color, I don't know, the color Shazam S, right? Shazam color. And why is there a color Shazam? Well, because there's this other thing that creates the possible worlds, or maybe they're, oh, not that it creates the possible worlds. These things, these possible worlds, relate to powers of God. God could create a Shazam. So there's a possible world where Shazam is a color. So yeah, it gives you all the stuff you want without any of the drawbacks. But at the time of the writing of the Grand Priest Logic book, this book wasn't written, so this is an impossibility. One drawback to this, I'd say the big drawback to this is that it's so new that nobody's really had time to evaluate it thoroughly yet. But yeah, there it is. So what is a possible world? Those are your possibilities for possible worlds, and that's the end of this video.